Hi, good morning. This is Joanna Nelson, and I am with the New Mexico Economic Development Department, and I'm on the finance team. And today you're joining us on a part of our New Mexico Economic Development Department FUNDIT webinar series. This is a part of an ongoing webinar series that we host through our FUNDIT group. And today we're really excited to be joined by Wade Patterson, who is the Active Transportation Program Supervisor with New Mexico Department of Transportation. So thanks for joining us. It'll be somewhat of a brief presentation today. And just to let you know that the presentation will be recorded. We will put a link to the presentation on our YouTube page, and we'll send that out to all the registrants as well as the PowerPoint, which has some active links and contacts in it. So feel free to use those as a reference, and we'll send that out probably today. So before we get started, I wanted just to give you a little bit background of what FUNDIT is. If you don't know, hopefully you've joined us on some of our other webinars and you're well familiar with the program, but just in case, FUNDIT is an informal group that meets bi-monthly, that's hosted by the department, the Economic Development Department, and specifically the finance team, with the idea and the mission that we want to try to help communities and local governments try to navigate funding sources when they have economic development projects or infrastructure projects in their communities that they are challenged with finding funding sources, because we all know that, you know, coming up with the idea and a fantastic plan isn't the hardest part. The hard part is figuring out where is the money going to come from to pay for the project at hand. So what we do is we bring together the major funders that are in our state that represent state programs as well as federal programs. So at those meetings, we have assembled this group of funders that are representing their programs, and they're able to give feedback on the projects that are presented. So communities are able to apply with their projects, and once the application is received and reviewed, they get the opportunity that's a lot like the TV show Shark Tank, in the way that, but not as vicious, I guess. They have the opportunity to present their project in front of the group, and then at that meeting, they receive feedback directly from the funders. So it's a very collaborative platform. It's full of ideas, brainstorming, and then not only do we have these organizations represented and agencies, we have COG directors from all the different regions of the state, as well as the New Mexico regional representatives. So within that group, you have a wealth of experience that's able to offer feedback, and it's really unique in the way that, you know, someone in Northwest can say, that sounds like exactly what the project that we did a couple of years ago. Here are the challenges that we faced, and this is how we solved those. Or have you thought about doing this? Or have you thought about this type of program? So it's a great opportunity. If you have any questions, any interest in seeing if your project fits, feel free to give me a call or to reach out. I would like to say that the type of projects that do really well in the FUNDIT program are the multi-layered programs. So not just our downtown city hall needs a new roof, but we have a revitalization project downtown. So there are components of transportation, of water, of business development, of tourism. So those are the projects that really benefit, I think, from being able to connect with all the different agencies. And then going along with the mission of FUNDIT, as we're experiencing this webinar, which is a part of the webinar series. FUNDIT's mission is to educate local communities and governments and anyone else that's interested in learning more about funding sources. So that's why, thankfully, Wade has joined us today to talk about Department of Transportation's some of their funding programs. We have the webinar series as an ongoing educational component, but we've also created this map with that same idea of trying to distill and navigate the different funding sources. So right now, the map, this is version 1.0, but this is a funding map that you can access off this website. And we're in the process of actually redoing it and putting it on the NMDOT website. And what you can do is, within a project, all the different components that it might involve, transportation, housing, those are shown, but you can go to the different categories, and then within the category, those are live links that you can actually say, okay, this is an opportunity that we weren't aware of. And we're using a lot of the information from DFA's catalog of assistance, and as well as direct feedback from our group members. So we're excited about this, and again, it's not perfect, it's version 1.0, but I keep on the lookout for this, and I have the link to our website as well. You can check that out once we upload version 2.0. But we have this available in PDF if you need it too, and there's plenty of other categories on here that you can't see. This is just a screenshot. But that is an overview of FUNDIT and our mission. And so without further ado, I'd like to introduce Wade Patterson with Department of Transportation, and he's going to walk us through some of the programs that they offer that are available to communities for projects. So Wade?
Great, thank you. So again, my name is Wade, and I work here at the Mexico Department of Transportation in the Planning Bureau. I want to talk to you today about two funding sources that are exclusively for use by tribal and local public agencies, what we call TLPAs, for the development of pedestrian and bicycle infrastructure and some related activities. So the first, well, these are the two programs that I'm going to cover today. One is called the Transportation Alternatives Program, which I'll refer to as TAP, and the second is the Recreational Trails Program. The Transportation Alternatives Program is a federal reimbursement program. I'll talk a little bit about what that means and what the implications are for you as a TLPA, should you receive funding. But it's specifically for the development of pedestrian bicycle facilities, safe routes to school projects, other infrastructure improvements that help enhance access to transit. So you can see the emphasis really here is on providing other ways of getting around in your community beyond just a passenger vehicle. So I want to say a few things about some of these eligible activities. Safe Routes to School is a program that used to be a standalone program, but with the passage of the FAST Act, the current legislation, transportation legislation that we're operating under now, that is no longer a standalone program, but all the activities that were part of Safe Routes to School are eligible under TAP. And if you do an internet search for Safe Routes to School, there is an active website with all kinds of information about their programming and toolkits and things, if that's something that interests you. Safe Routes to School activities are specifically for ages K through 8. The Recreational Trails Program, as the name implies, is focused on the development of recreational trails. And again, it is a reimbursement program, federal reimbursement program, and I have highlighted here that this is for development of trails and related facilities for non-motorized and motorized uses. So I just want to highlight the motorized portion for a moment here. The money for this program comes from the fuel tax for off-highway vehicles, so your quads and motocross bikes and things like that. And so a certain portion of that money has to go back into investment in facilities for those uses. So we typically don't get a lot of applications for those types of activities. So if that's something that is something that your community is excited about, or has already developed some facilities and looking to develop more or expand what you have, you might take a look at this program. I want to say a moment here about federal reimbursement, and I'll return to it in a later subsequent slide. But what we mean by that is that you need to know this depending on the size of your community and your capacity, that should you receive one of these awards, you would be asked to pay for costs up front and then turn around and ask for a reimbursement of a portion of that. It's 85.44%. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment, of the total cost. And so the remainder you have to cover. And you also have to know that you need to sort of float that money until you can submit the reimbursement request to us and get reimbursed. Our contracts typically say you should be doing that at a minimum quarterly, so you could do it more frequently. But for some of our smaller and more rural communities, cash flow is a real consideration. So I just kind of want to highlight that now so that you're aware of that. So this next slide is taken from our active transportation guide, and it illustrates just a sampling of some of the more common projects that these funding sources are used for. You can see columns on the right tell you which program can support those types of activities. These programs can support more than just these activities, and the guide that this is drawn from has a full description of all the eligible activities. And this presentation is good timing because the end of this week we'll be releasing our active transportation guide for recreational trails and the TAP program for the next application cycle. So just to cover a little bit about how that works, we'll release the guide. It will be available on the NMDOT planning website. Again, if you search NMDOT planning, you should be the first hit. But you will also need to work in your application process with your associated MPO, your Metropolitan Planning Organization, or your RTPO, your Regional Transportation Planning Organization, to submit the application. So we open the call the end of this week, and then the applications will be due at the end of November 2018. So it's a fairly long time period, but it does take a little bit to assemble all of the pieces for this. And so I encourage you, if you're interested, once the guide is out, to kind of get your ducks in a row and start having conversations with your MPO or your RTPO about applying. And those entities, the MPO and the RTPO, will have their own timeline about when they would like materials from you. They'll assist you in the process, facilitate some of the process, and depending on their staff capabilities, may be able to help in some review prior to submissions. But the applications will come to us directly from the MPO and the RTPO. So that's why you have to work closely with them. So who can apply for this funding? I mentioned the TLPAs, but there is a little bit of a broader set of eligible applicants that also include things like regional transportation authorities, school districts, which mysteriously I've listed twice here, and other local education agencies. That's related primarily to the Safe Routes to School type of programs, other transit agencies, and then state and federal land or natural resource agencies. For example, we have provided funding to the U.S. Forest Service for the development or improvement of existing trail networks. And similar to that, we have provided funding to counties or municipalities who partnered with their adjacent Forest Service landowners for the development of recreational trails, which fits nicely within a sort of economic development model for some of our communities. Who cannot apply? NMDOT cannot access this funding. That's a good thing for you to know. MPOs, RTPOs, and nonprofits cannot apply directly for this funding, but they can partner with one of these eligible recipients on a project. And then lastly, it's important to know that in our review of applications, we do conduct a financial review that includes looking at your audits and some other aspects of fiscal health. And if an entity is deemed to be high risk, we unfortunately cannot support that, that project. So how do you apply? Well, your first step is that you've been in contact with your MPO or RTPO, and they will help you set up a meeting with the NMDOT district that is responsible for the area in which you're located. And there may be some other interested parties or vested parties that would come to that meeting, for example, the NMDOT Environment Group. And that is a time for you to lay out the intended scope of your project. It's very conversational. It's a way of going through what you're intending to do. And for those people who are experts, your engineers, your environmental review folks, to tell you how feasible this project is. And it may help you make certain modifications that would make for a more successful project. They need to sign off on this before you proceed to the next step. The main application includes PPF, the project prospectus form, which is sort of taking the feasibility form and making it more finalized and formal. And it includes some funding estimates for the project. There is an application. In the application, among other things, you're asked to respond to a series of questions that relate to goals that are in our statewide long-range transportation plan. There is a resolution of sponsorship that we need, and we provide some templates for that. This relates to your commitment to providing the local match. So just to reiterate, as the reimbursement program, you need to foot 100% of the costs. Then you turn around and invoice us for 85.44% of the costs, which I know is an awkward amount, but that's the federal percentage that they lay out. So the remainder, 14.56%, is what you as the local entity need to invest in the project. So we need some kind of indication that your city council, your county commission, your tribal government has committed to that match. Letters of support always help. Other things that help are that these projects are in other plans in your community. What we don't want to see is somebody independently saying, you know, I've always thought it would be cool to have a trail from this place to that place. Because I guarantee once you get out there on the ground, the public is going to come out and say, well, why are you doing that and not something over here? And ideally, these projects are coming out of planning processes where you have worked with the community in order to identify some priority of projects related to pedestrian and bicycle and supportive transit related activities. And then lastly, we want to see where this is located. So some kind of map indicating project location is required. Some additional things to keep in mind. Again, keep hammering home the reimbursement nature of this, but this is very important for you all to be aware of. And again, your local match requirement, that's really just the percentage that you're not going to get reimbursed for, is that 14.56%. If you're undertaking the development of some physical infrastructure, let's say a sidewalk or a sidewalk improvement project, or you're adding bicycle lanes on some roadways in your community, this process works hand in hand with our DOT process. So in 1 year, and on this example, I've outlined a 2-year project, but the timeline could be longer. You're going to be doing your design phase. You'll enter into a contract with DOT to design the project and get all the drawings ready to the point where you can put it out for bid for a contractor to actually construct the project. During that process, which could take a year or it could take 2 years, and I'll talk a little bit about how we're going to deal with that in this next application round in a moment, you have to complete 5 certifications. Some of the certifications may be fairly straightforward because it's not something that directly impacts the project, but it still needs to be reviewed and signed off on. But others can be quite onerous and can take quite a long time, specifically right-of-way and environmental clearance, just depending on the nature of the project. And those are conversations that should take place early on in that PFF, that feasibility review with the DOT district in order to get that expert input. It's going to let you know, hey, this looks a little complicated. You may want to allow 2 years for you to get all these certifications, because let's say the environmental review process looks like it could be particularly complicated. And I'll pause for a moment here on the right-of-way just to say that these funding sources cannot be used to purchase right-of-way if that is something that needs to happen for this project, but it can be used to develop the documents to prove that to illustrate that the project is within an existing right-of-way. So in year 2, or whatever subsequent year is required for you in the first stage to get all of those certifications and complete design and be ready to go out to bid, is your construction year. You enter into another contract with the New Mexico Department of Transportation in order to undertake that phase. And one thing that I'll just caution you on or advise you on as you're assembling a cost estimate for your project is to include construction management as a cost. This is something that has sort of fallen off the radar or not been included in some applications in the past, and it creates a tricky situation. Even a simple project needs construction management. There are just certain aspects that are required in terms of traffic control or other aspects of the project, and you want to make sure you include those costs in your application, or you may be forced to foot that bill yourself, or it could jeopardize the project if you don't have that local money available. And then the last bullet mentions what we call non-infrastructure projects. Generally speaking, we're talking about plans here. So let's say you're doing a pedestrian and or bicycle master plan for your community. You're not going to go through construction or design and construction process. You're going to contract directly with the Planning Bureau on that. Similarly, recreational trails that develop soft surface trails like single track trails in forest land do not go through our design and construction process, and we manage those contracts here out of planning. And that is the end of my presentation. You'll notice that the contact here is Shannon Glendenning. She is managing the RTP and TAP programs. And you see her contact information up there. She's actually listening in. And yeah, I think that's it. And I think this is a good time just to start taking questions, because hopefully your minds have been cranking and you're thinking about particular projects that may or may not be a good fit, and you want to know more about that.
Great, thank you, Wade. I didn't mention it, but you are able to type in questions in the bottom right of the screen in the little gray box. You can type in questions. And then I don't know if you want to mention, Wade, the programs that Rebecca was going to talk about, or what she handles. Rebecca Myers was going to be on the presentation too, but unfortunately she had some work to do. But do you want to mention what she handles and the best way to contact her, or for what people would contact her about?
Yes. Let me just bring up some contact info for her real quick. Rebecca is what's called a STIP manager. So the STIP is the State Transportation Improvement Program. It's the collection of programmed transportation projects from all over the state. And it's a rather complicated beast to manage, particularly because these projects are sometimes in flux and being modified and adjusted as time goes on. And she manages all of that process. As part of that, she knows all of the details and ins and outs of how different, what we refer to as colors of money from the Federal Highway Administration, what kinds of projects they can and cannot be used for. I'm a little hesitant to get into some of the details on that because I'm really only knowledgeable about the particular funding sources that we manage. So yeah, I don't want to say something that isn't true. But Rebecca's contact information, her email, which is probably the best way to reach her, is Rebecca, REBCCA, .Maes, M-A-E-S, @ state.nm.us. So I know some of the funding sources that she was looking to talk about are not funding categories that locals can necessarily directly access. It's a bit complicated, but if you live in Albuquerque, for example, there are pots of money that come directly to the mid-region MPO that then they have their own process for programming for those municipalities and counties that fall within their planning area. And then outside of that, largely the RTPO areas are working with their associated district around trying to get the projects that they think are priorities taken care of. But that's a bit of a dance with the districts because they have often they have some other commitments and obligations that they need to maintain in terms of the interstate system, for example. But those wouldn't be things that you could apply directly for.
Okay, great. And we'll provide her contact when we send out the presentation as well. So I don't see any questions right now, so I think that's a good thing, Wade, that you at least people know who to contact if they do have follow-up questions as well.
Okay. And again, I just want to the guide for these two funding sources will be out the end of this week, and so you may receive information about them from your MPO and your RTPO if you happen to be the one that's sort of the representative of your entity to those groups. In the absence of that, you can go to the NMDOT planning website and access it that way. Oh, and I will say a few more things about that. This call is for projects that begin in 2020, federal fiscal year 20, so that year begins October 1, 2020. And we're asking entities to apply for and tell us the years in which they think design and construction will take place. But we may exercise some discretion in moving some of that funding around a little bit to say, hey, this looks like a complicated project, let's give it 2 years for design, or rather than doing it in 20, would you be amenable to starting the project in 21? This will allow us to accommodate more of the better ranked and scored project. There's committees that review these projects, but we wouldn't make any changes like that without consulting with the local entity first. But just know that this next call is for projects that would begin in federal fiscal year 20.
And Wade, I did have a question. How do people stay up to date with the RFPs and things like that? Do you have a newsletter or something? Or where can people access that information?
Yeah, which information? I'm sorry.
Just updates to any of the programs or calls for RFPs. Where can they find?
Sure. Well, and so as I said, these are the two main programs that we manage, and the call doesn't happen every year. We largely rely on the RTPOs and the MPOs to get that information out. But if you go to the NMDOT planning website, you will see all current information and documents that are related to the programs that we manage out of planning.
Oh, okay. And there was one question that came in. It says, has there been project fundings? Has there been project fundings from tribal reservations?
There have. Laguna Pueblo is a good example. They went through a master planning process to identify a trail network and bicycle infrastructure that would link their various villages. And so they have applied to and received some funding for a number of activities. One was related to a roundabout that they installed. Another is related to installing a multi-use path adjacent to some of their roadways. So yes, some of the tribes have applied for, accessed, and used this money.
Okay, thanks. And there was another question. How much TAP and RTP funding is available? Will you be providing a formula on how it may need to be divided across New Mexico communities?
Sure. So all of that information is included in the guide. It's a bit complicated for me to explain, and I could have drawn up a slide, but just a moment here, I'm going to bring up our guide. and I'll tell you more in broad strokes. But so for TAP, it is divided by rural, small urban, and large urban, and there is a formula that determines how much goes into each of those funding pots. And then for recreational trails, it's divided even a little more complicated. But here, I'll give you just a estimate here. So for each year, and again, I said we have federal fiscal year 20, 21, and then other years, depending on the applications we receive and those that are ranked highly, how many years we'll program. But for TAP, the anticipated annual funding is $5,715,000. And then for rec trails, it's a smaller pot of money, but we're looking at an annual allocation of $1.4 million. And I'm rounding those numbers. For RTP, the funding pots are divided into non-motorized, motorized, and what's called diverse. Diverse is any mixture of motorized and non-motorized. So it may be trails that could be accessed by more than one type of user.
Okay, thanks. And then there was another question. There is interest in developing a comprehensive recreational trail plan in our county. How often do these types of planning projects receive funding through RTP?
Yeah, so when we do the next call, again, will kind of depend on how many years we end up programming from this round, but you can anticipate that if we, let's say we programmed federal fiscal year 20 and 21, and maybe part of 22, so there's still money available in 22 and beyond, we would then be doing the next call in federal fiscal year 20. So I'd say probably about every 2 to 3 years is when we're doing a call under the current way that we're managing the project. But that type of plan would very much be an eligible project under these funding sources.
Okay, great. Anything else you want to cover, Wade?
No, I think that covers it. If there are more questions.
Oh, one more question came in. If a municipality was awarded funds for phase 1, are funds for phase 2 more attractive?
And I'm not sure what they mean by attractive, but it's a good question, relates to a few important things to know. So if federal funding is used to design a project, it is a requirement that that subsequent project get built within a certain time frame, which is about 10 years. It does sometimes happen in these projects that we manage, you know, the local projects, that for a variety of reasons, they're unable to obligate the construction funds in time, and so that project drops out. We put those projects on an orphaned project list, and so if another project falls out in the future, or there is money available in a subsequent year, we will plug those in. So if a project fails, we do have a commitment to helping fund those projects in the long run. That being said, I don't encourage anyone to have their project not go through, you know, not meet the required deadlines. But sometimes things do happen. In general, though, if you're going to apply for design funds, unless you're going to specify that you have some other funds for the construction phase, we would prefer that you also apply for construction funding. Oh, and I do have one more thing to add. So let's say you've built your amenity. You've built your multi-use path that is paralleling your roadway and your community in front of the school. It's great. Everyone's happy about it. Who is responsible for maintaining that facility? When you build this an infrastructure like this using this federal funding, you as the local, tribal or local public agency take on, there's a maintenance agreement, you take on the responsibility for maintaining that project, and those parameters for how long, what the useful life of the project is, they're kind of addressed or referenced in the contract agreement.
Okay, all right, well, thank you so much, Wade.
You're very welcome.
just to fill you guys in, these are some upcoming NMEDD events that we have happening. Our Rural Efficient Business Program, we have a workshop coming up on the 30th, and that'll happen in Deming. This is the third workshop in a 6-part series that we're hosting across the state in collaboration with NMDOT, Energy, Minerals, Natural Resource Department, and USDA. So these workshops are targeted at businesses in rural areas and agricultural producers. And during the workshop, we have an engineer from NMDOT that can address issues on how businesses can reduce their energy costs. And then we also have at those meetings, we have utility providers, we have USDA and technical assistance providers. So it's a great opportunity to connect with resources if you're a business or if you have businesses in your community that are interested in saving money by reducing their energy and becoming more efficient. The next one will be in Clovis in August, and then we'll be in Carlsbad and Gallup, and you can register there. The workshops are free. And our upcoming FUNDIT meeting is June 5th. The application period for the meeting has passed, but you'll be able to apply. I think our next meeting will be sometime in August or early September. So we'll send out a call for applications for that next meeting. But you're more than welcome to attend. Just email me if you're interested. And that'll be in Albuquerque at the Mid-Region Council of Governments. And then we do have 2 upcoming webinars. We're really excited about a webinar that we're going to have on June 26th. And this is going to be from the CEO of the CDFA organization, where if you're not familiar with it, it's the Council of Development Finance Agencies. And his name is Mr. Rittner, and he will be discussing bond financing for the state of New Mexico. So that'll be really interesting. And then we will have another webinar in July as a part of this series that will invite USDA program managers to talk about their funding opportunities. So we're excited about that one. As I said, I'll email this PowerPoint out, and so you can access these RSVP links and website links and access the contact information if you're interested. And here's our contact for the NMEDD finance team. As well, you can go to this link, which will go to our finance page. We have all of our finance programs that we administer through the State Economic Development Department here. So that concludes our presentation. So I'd like to thank you again for joining us. Really appreciate you spending time, and a special thanks to Wade for his time and his knowledge and sharing that information with us. So thank you all, and hope to see you at the next webinar or a future event. And please contact us if you have any questions or if we can be of any help in any way. So thank you. Have a great day.
Thanks, Johanna.
Bye, Wade. Thank you.